Hi, it's Class Nouveaux. I am going to do a totally impromptu, unplanned monologue about Classix Nouveaux. And the reason I'm doing that is because probably Classix Nouveaux were my favourite band when I was younger. And I'd probably say they were my first favourite band, a band that I probably explored in some detail, paid a bit of interest to. And I'm not entirely sure which was the first song I heard by Classix Nouveaux. It was either Inside Outside or it was seeing them perform live on Top of the Pops, Is It a Dream? So I'm not sure which of the two it was, but both songs had a significant impact on me. Inside Outside, I remember hearing that because there was this family buying our house and they were bringing stuff over. And the lad of the family that was moving in had a load of records, mostly mod, ska type stuff, some soul, some good stuff, Lambrettas, Merton Parkers, that sort of thing. But in amongst all that, and really inexplicably, he had the Inside Outside single. And I was intrigued by that. I thought this looks so different to all the other stuff. And when he'd gone away and dropped off all his stuff, I put Inside Outside on. And I just thought, this is absolutely brilliant. And now I'm thinking about it, I think I heard Is It a Dream first on Top of the Pops. And because of that, that piqued an interest in Classix Nouveaux. So I put Inside Outside on, and it was brilliant because it was kind of had a punky vibe. It was very high energy. I can't remember the BPM on Inside Outside, but it's fast by today's standards. And it had a sort of dark mood about it, which is exactly probably what the band wanted to portray. But there was one simple thing that I really picked out that kind of got me, and it's crazy, really. And it was the outro. And it sounds like probably some sort of train with a bit of delay or echo on it. But it just kind of worked for me. It made me feel as though maybe a bit nervous, actually, I felt a bit scared almost. It was kind of unnerving, and I don't really know why. It just kind of, yeah, it just didn't quite feel comfortable with me, that outro, but worked perfectly for me. So I think having heard Is It a Dream, which in reality is very different to Inside Outside, um, having heard Is It a Dream, then Inside Outside, I thought, this is a band I want to know more about. And I probably annoyed, well, I know I annoyed the local record shop owner in Macclesfield. It's called BJ's Records. I think it did discos as well, but who knows? Anyway, I used to annoy the owner because they had a little book which had all of the records they had stored in the shop, because they had a load of stuff on display and they had a load of stuff upstairs. And I wanted to know more about Classix Nouveau's discography, because I couldn't get my hands on anything that kind of listed all of it from beginning to, I guess, Is It a Dream, or wherever we were up to at that point. And I used to go in regularly on a Saturday and I'd ask to look at the book that was filled in biro, and it had all these songs listed there. And I thought, right, those are kind of songs I'm going to look out for. And it had things like Robots Dance. I thought, well, what the hell's that sound like? And Nasty Little Green Men, what's going on there? This all sounds a bit surreal and, comic book. What the hell's going on with this band? So I went on a mission, really, to buy the singles with my pocket money, which wasn't a lot. So it took me a while. I had to do a bit of a few errands, I think, as well, to build up the stash of cash to go out and buy all these singles. And over time, I kind of got all the singles. So, when I heard sort of things like Robots Dance, I'll be honest, I struggled with that. I was I don't know, probably about 11 or 12. and I thought, this is weird. And there's a lot of screaming going on, and there's a fair bit of high-pitched singing going on Is It a Dream? But there's some serious screaming going on Robots Dance. I thought, wow, I probably didn't think in these terms, but by my sort of vocabulary now, I'm thinking this is pretty avant-garde. This is weird. This is actually, in some ways, quite a hard listen for a young kid who's listened to mainly stuff on Radio 1. You know, crazy. These guys are crazy. These guys are really crazy guys. They're really doing it because they believe in it. And then they released Nasty Little Green Men, which was equally crazy and bonkers. And you know, again, very different to the sort of new romantic movement. This was kind of post-punk. There was definitely still a very strong vibe in the likes of, you know, Robots Dance and Nasty Little Green Men of the post-punk sort of era. Not much synthesizers going on there. So anyway, I'm waffling on a little bit about the early stuff, but you know, Classix Nouveaux are a very interesting band. Quite often got slated in the press, and I think it's two things that the press couldn't handle. Probably because they didn't have a particularly broad way of thinking about things. First of all, I think early on, for the first album and to a certain degree the second album, La Verite, Classix Nouveaux are a bit of an anomaly. They're a bit avant-garde. I think Sal Solo's mentioned influences in the past where he cited the likes of Lena Lovitch. Possibly he's even talked about Nina Hagen and people like that as influences to the earlier sound of Classix Nouveaux. And you can absolutely hear that in Night People, which was their first album and probably for me their best album. It had a very dark vibe, and whilst you couldn't call it gothic, it had some gothic sensibilities, if you like, particularly in things like The Protector of Night. There's just a general vibe of, you know, doom and gloom. So for me, Night People was an absolute classic album, and I'm pretty sure that was the first album I got by Classix Nouveaux. And you know, it had a lot more sort of guitar, quite heavy on the bass. There were some synths in there, but you know, very strong sort of post-punk vibe there. And but in amongst it all, there was these crazy falsetto vocals. I mean, if you listen to Runaway, I mean, that's just a song that's going to divide opinion, isn't it? You know, it's a brilliant song, really fast, really lively. It's kind of got the deep baritone vocals by Sal Solo, and then it's got this crazy sort of falsetto going on, and I can see why some reviewers couldn't handle it. They just didn't have the lateral musical thinking power to cope with it. So as a result of that, they got crummy reviews from certain reviewers. And then the other thing that was just nonsense was because Sal Solo had a bald head, they just had a go at him. You know, you'd read these reviews and very rarely they talk about the music. But if they did, they'd talk about the falsetto vocals and then start talking about Sal Solo's hair or lack of it. So Night People was brilliant. I remember getting that for birthday present, and I had been given it in the morning, unwrapped it, but had no time to play it. And I had football practice after school. And I thought, what do I do? Do I go to football practice or do I go home and play the record? So I ran home. I actually ran home. It was probably about 1.5 miles in order to play that album because I just thought this is going to be brilliant. And it was brilliant. It was a real mixture of songs. As you know, as if you're a fan of Classix Nouveaux, you've got some real extremes there. You know, you've got like a very sort of pop sensible track under the name of Guilty, which was really unlucky it didn't chart because I think if my facts are right, it was on I think it was scheduled to be shown on Top of the Pops. And then there was a strike, and I think Top of the Pops was axed for several weeks. So they never really got the chance to be played. I suppose there's always a question to the record label and the management of Classix Nouveaux. why didn't you try and re-release that song? Because it had a pretty good video for the time, a bit of a new romantic video. But anyway, I think Classix Nouveaux are very unlucky there because they're on the edge of the charts. Guilty probably would have got into the top 20, I would imagine, without the strike action. And maybe would have built a bit of a fan base there. But anyway, they had to wait for their second album, La Verite, which is definitely more in that sort of new romantic sort of style, a lot more synthesizers, but still got, you know, the incredible rhythm section of Mick Sweeney and BP Herding, and some excellent guitar work by Gary Steadman. And again, in amongst it all, it's got the falsetto and baritone of Sal Solo, which absolutely divides opinion. Some people love it, some people hate it. But La Verite still had a very melancholic vibe. Is It a Dream was probably unlike most of the other songs on the album. But yeah, La Verite, it's got some great stuff. But again, if you really don't like Classix Nouveaux, you will not like the title track, La Verite. You just won't, because of the fact that it is so very Classix Nouveaux at the time. So after La Verite, Classix Nouveaux released The End or the Beginning. It's quite an apt title because that particular single, I don't think it charted very highly. I think it got to maybe number 60 in the UK charts, which was probably a little bit disappointing for the band and for the record label. Anyway, my memories are that things went pretty quiet on Classix Nouveaux after The End of the Beginning. They weren't really getting much coverage in the press, and you just didn't see anything about them. And then there was a record played. I can't remember who was playing it on Radio 1, and I thought, that's familiar, sounds familiar, and it was Forever and a Day. So it's quite different to the sounds that they'd used on previous records. But it was a good song. I enjoyed Forever and a Day, but it just didn't get much airplay, and I don't think it charted. I was perusing the new singles at the local record shop and saw this thing that said Classix Nouveaux in the same style of writing as that was used for Forever and a Day single. And it was a new single called Never Never Comes. And I hadn't heard anything about it, hadn't received any kind of promotional support. It was simply in the singles section, new singles at the record shop. Yeah, no radio play, nothing. Real shock, really, to be looking through the singles and seeing something for Classix Nouveaux. So I bought it straight away, hadn't heard it. And actually, it was an incredible song, but incredibly different to the sound that they'd had on La Verite, and definitely very different to Night People. So clearly things have changed dramatically for the band in terms of the sound. And that kind of moves you on to the next album, Secret, which is, depends on who's listening, it's either a very well produced album, and I think it is, but then is it overproduced? And again, it depends on what you prefer listening to. But it's a very polished album, and my understanding is the record label hadn't really budgeted things very carefully, and I think the band had got the best producers in and really gone to town and tried the best that they could. And then, according to an interview I think Sal Solo did a year or two ago, basically the record label said, we're not going to support you any further. So they had the record recorded and well produced, but it wasn't going to get any promotional support whatsoever. And I mean, the reality is, when you don't promote a record, it's unlikely to get the success it needs. And it didn't chart in the UK. Never Never Comes didn't chart. I think Forever and a Day charted, but again, it may not have done in the UK. So all a bit of a damp squib at the end of things. And considering probably how much money the record label had already spent on Secret in the production side, it just seems odd that they didn't at least try and promote it in any way whatsoever after that. So, yeah, all a bit strange. So, Secret was the third album by Classix Nouveaux, and it was incredibly different in sound to the first two. You got Night People, which is like a darker post-punk sound with some synths. Then you've got Verite, which is a bit more polished with more synths, bit more of a new romantic feel to it. And then you've got Secret, which is well produced, lots of different instrumentation, quite a lot of synths going on as well. And I would say of those three, because I haven't mentioned Battle Cry yet, that comes later. I think Secret's my third favourite of all the albums that they'd done at that point. Even though Never Never Comes is an incredibly good single. But if you look at the comparisons of Never Never Comes and then compare it with some of the early recordings like Nasty Little Green Men, there's been a massive shift in sound, style, and execution of music. And they've really covered a massive range. So at that point, Classix Nouveaux had massive diversity in their back catalogue. You can look at other bands from that period and they will not have had that diversity. So credit to Classix Nouveaux for having the flexibility to migrate from where they were to where they ended up with Secret. But unfortunately, Secret wasn't a success commercially, and that's the end of the road for Classix Nouveaux with Liberty, which was part of EMI. One interesting thing about Classix Nouveaux, I never saw them live. I was too young. I remember they were touring the La Verite album, and they were playing the Ritz in Manchester. And I thought, I'll try and go to that. Unfortunately, it was an 18s or over gig, I guess because of the way the venue was set up with bars and what have you, which is really disappointing. And again, you must ask questions, if Classix Nouveaux were trying to grow the commercial offering, why not allow or go to a venue that actually allows people, say, 14 or above or whatever it is? Because I remember going to see Depeche Mode as a youngster. In 1982, I think I was 12. So I was into that gig, and then when Classix Nouveaux announced theirs, couldn't go, you had to be 18 or above. So opportunity missed, who knows? But anyway, the rest is history. I kind of moved on in terms of musical preferences anyway after 1983-84 into sort of darker realms, and maybe that's a topic for another time, who knows? But with regards to Classix Nouveaux, I kind of put it to one side, and probably during the 90s rekindled an interest in the band. And then with the advent of the internet, I did various searches to try and find out any further information about Classix Nouveaux, whether there are any lost recordings, demos that never saw the light of day, that sort of thing. And in order to do that, I contacted Sal Solo because I found out that he had an email account, and I sent him an email. Well, to cut a long story short, he was quite dismissive of the email, and maybe just had enough of Classix Nouveaux at that point and didn't think there was anything in it. But I did ask as to whether there's any recordings and demos and stuff like that, and he pretty much said anything that he had, he'd thrown it away or given it away or something like that. So there really was nothing left. What there is in the public domain is what it is. So a little bit disheartened, I came away thinking, okay, I really don't think they're going to reform. There's no chance of that happening. But anyway, as luck would have it, they did reform about 20 years later. So credit to the band, and they released Battle Cry and they've promoted it with, great, I guess, enthusiasm. And it's a really good album, so credit to them. It's nothing like the earlier albums, but then what do you expect? It's 40 years ago. So credit to Classix Nouveaux for coming back. I don't think we're going to see them live. I don't know anything factual, but just looking at the economics of touring and the fact that band members are in multiple locations in the Western world, it's just going to be probably prohibitive. But hey, let's be surprised. You never know. But I just can't see them touring, which is a shame, because I think the hardcore fans would absolutely love that. I've never seen them live, as I said. I was far too young. If I could see them live, that'd be great. But anyway, let's summarize quickly. Classix Nouveaux, a band that deserved, in my view, more respect. They were courageous. They were bold. They did things their way in many cases. They had a vision. It was probably slightly different to the supposed new romantic guys and some of the other sort of post-punk bands. They had a distinctive style with certainly early on an avant-garde sort of flavour. And that for me was the magic of Classix Nouveaux. Out of the ashes of punk rock, here came this band thinking about sci-fi imagery along with darker themes of desperation and the future's not looking too good. They were a product of the economic and social times of England or Britain. They weren't sort of going with the other theme, which Duran Duran went with Rio, which was this luxury culture. And interestingly, Heaven 17 talked about the luxury gap. Classix Nouveaux were, a band that represented the spirit of the times, the true spirit, where a lot of people were in poverty, having a difficult time of it, coming out of the late 70s and early 80s. So, yeah, Classix Nouveaux, thanks for the music. You were honest, you were true to what you wanted to do, and great memories. If you haven't heard Classix Nouveaux, listen to their back catalogue, listen to it with an open mind. And if you want to hear something a bit different, start with Night People and then work through to La Verite and then Secret and then Battle Cry. So, yeah, good stuff. Thanks for listening.